Celtic followed up their big win over Third Lanark in the first round of the Scottish Cup with a cagey 1-1 draw against Hibernian at Celtic Park. And although the second round match in the Scottish Cup was a must-win game, the pressure was off in a sense as they lined up against second division opposition in the form of Alloa Athletic. Man in the Know wrote in the Glasgow Observer on the morning of the match, "Celt's little affair with Alloa at Parkhead doesn't seem likely to prove a palpitating affair. The shock team of the Crilly era is now quite a commonplace side, and I can't see them making much impression on the Celtic 11 which won at Cathkin. Although McGrogan's suspension has expired, I don't suppose we'll see the big Largs boy in the cup side. At least not just yet." Man in the Know was right about McGrogan, as Celtic lined up with the same team that had beaten Third Lanark and drawn with Hibs. Shevlin, W. McStay, Hilly, Wilson, J. McStay, McFarlane, Connolly, Gallacher, McGrory, Thompson, McLean. By half-time, Man in the Know could have been congratulating himself on his prediction that the match would not prove a palpitating affair, as a low-key 45 minutes of football ended with the home side 2 goals up, both scored by Jimmy McGrory and both created by Patsy Gallacher. Grampian, in the Daily Record of the 9th of February 1925, reported, "McGrory, ever a thorn in the flesh of the wee County defence, had both the Parkhead goals, both of which Gallacher schemed for. 10 minutes after the start, following a marvellous Crawford save, Hedrick was dilatory in clearing. Patsy nipped in and slipping the ball to McGrory, the centre had no difficulty in netting. A typical Gallacher dribble after half an hour, followed by the usual timely pass to McGrory, put Alloa 2 down, and thus the teams turned." That should have been it, but the second half did not go to plan. Man in the Know reported on the 14th of February 1925, "Celtic came out for the resumption with a slightly bored air, as though they felt that further play was an unnecessary nuisance. But ere long they were startled out of their placid ambling when Shevlin, getting one from Merry, fumbled and dropped the ball and then fell on it before clawing it out. Alloa claimed, and still claim, that a goal had been scored. Was the ball over the line? The bird's eye view from the pressmen's lofty eyrie showed it to be a desperately near thing. Quite possibly Alloa's claim was well founded, but the referee, Binney of Falkirk, followed use and wont in giving the defending side the benefit of the doubt." While the Celtic-leaning Man in the Know suggests the ball could well have been over, Grampian in the Daily Record was more sure. "The keeper was lying on the line at the time, and as he turned and got the ball with outstretched hand, it looked a good goal." This fright did not shake Celtic out of their second-half torpor, and 10 minutes later, a corner kick led to Alloa pulling one back. Man in the Know's report suggesting a lack of height in the Celtic defence being to blame. "There was not a shadow of a doubt about the goal headed in by tall Thackeray, with half a dozen Celtic midgets bobbing about his chest as a perfectly placed corner came sailing over from the left. Thackeray's nod propelled the ball just beneath the bar, with Shevlin unable to reach it, which revives the doubt about our young goalie's ability to deal with high shots." Finally, Celtic were shaken out of their lethargy, but rather than go back on the offensive, they played a possession game for the final 15 minutes. Man in the Know reporting, "Gallacher, McLean and Thompson indulged in mazy dribbles which, if they led nowhere in particular, at least deprived the Wasps of the leather at this crucial period when they might have made deadly use of it. The breeze raised by Alloa's goal soon died away, and the game, after a tense spasm of excitement, petered out tamely." The narrow win saw Celtic into the third round, and despite Rangers going strong in the league, Celtic and, oddly, Partick Thistle were now favourites to lift the trophy, possibly because it had been over 20 years since Rangers had won the Scottish Cup, and there was a feeling that they were jinxed in the competition. Man in the Know wasn't so sure, and there is an air of resignation about his conclusion on the 14th of February. "I don't often see the Jags, but on recent performances they seem quite strong enough to lift the trophy. I see Celtic very often, and only occasionally can I detect streaks of cup-winning form. What can you make of a team which goes to Cathkin and rips the strong-going thirds into ribbons, and then nearly fails to beat Alloa at Parkhead? The golden gift of consistency used to be Celt's most priceless possession. They seem to have lost it. Celtic's first foreign excursion had taken place only 10 years before, but the summer tour of Europe had already become something of a club tradition, and it was with a sense of great excitement that the Celtic party set out for a tour of the empire then known as Austria-Hungary, before heading to Germany in mid-May 1914. For working class boys in the first half of the 20th century, opportunities to travel abroad were few and far between unless you joined the army or navy. While Willie Maley, the directors, and older players such as Sonny Jim Young, Jimmy McMenemy and Alec McNair were by now experienced travellers. For those younger players, signed since the last tour in the summer of 1912, this could seem like the adventure of a lifetime. Historians have traced the causes of the First World War to as far back as the Franco-Prussian War of 1870-71. But there was no hint in the newspapers that Britain, France and Russia would be at war with both countries Celtic would be visiting within 3 months of their tour. If there was to be a war in 1914, it seemed far likelier in May that it would break out in Ireland, as Unionists and Nationalists alike formed armed groups in anticipation of the passage of the Home Rule Bill that proposed the setting up of an autonomous parliament in Dublin. Celtic were bound first for a place where they had already had a great influence on the development of the game, in probably the first location outside of Britain where football had been adopted seriously. Former Celtic player Johnny Madden, who played in the club's first ever match against Rangers in 1888 and was a fixture in the side until the late 1890s after signing permanently from Dumbarton in 1889, had become the manager of Slavia Prague in 1905 and is today regarded as the father of Czech football. Madden was much more of a football philosopher than Willie Maley was, and it's intriguing to imagine how Celtic's development might have turned out if their career paths had been swapped. The earliest tours had been marked by Celtic running up big wins against local sides, interspersed with harder fought matches against touring English sides. But football in Central Europe was rapidly improving, and the 1914 tour began with a 2-2 draw against Ferencváros on the 17th of May. Photographs from the match show a well-attended occasion, with the official attendance given as 25,000, and both Celtic goals were scored by Jimmy McMenemy. On the 24th of May, Celtic moved on to Vienna and Wiener Athletic Club were beaten 6-2 before the tourists headed to Germany and defeated Hertha Berlin 6-0. The only reverse of the tour came in Leipzig, where the local team, Leipziger Sportverein, recorded a 1-0 win over their illustrious visitors, and the tour was completed with a 5-0 victory over Berliner FC Prussen on the 1st of June. The most noteworthy game of the tour was an unscheduled challenge match against the FA Cup holders Burnley at the home of Ferencváros on the 21st of May 1914. It may or may not have been a surprise to Burnley to find themselves playing Celtic on their tour, but Celtic had no idea until they were informed by their hosts the day before that a match had been arranged, and a local Budapest newspaper proprietor added spice to the match by donating a handsome trophy and medals for the players. The match was drawn 1-1, Celtic taking a first-half lead when Patsy Gallacher was brought down in the act of shooting, Jimmy McMenemy converting the penalty, while Burnley equalised, also from the spot, when a Celtic defender was penalised for handball in the second half. By the time Burnley equalised, the match had already descended into what the papers euphemistically called roughness, and with things threatening to get out of hand, Celtic refused to play any extra time. The Dundee Evening Telegraph of the 25th of May 1914 gives a flavour of what was going on as the match progressed. An extraordinary scene was witnessed towards the close of the football match between Burnley and Celtic for possession of a cup presented by a local donor. Celtic had most of the play and, after Burnley had equalised from a penalty kick, a good deal of roughness entered into the contest. It is almost impossible, writes a correspondent, to give a description of the last 15 minutes of this remarkable game. Some of the players mistook each other for the ball. Two came to blows. The feeling was intense, and when the referee asked the players to cross over to play extra time, a Burnley player shouted to a Celt, "Let's play a quarter of an hour more. I want to have it out with you." Then he made a rush at the Parkhead player. It was probably as well for the Englishman that some of the players rushed in and separated the couple. It was a thrilling finish. Some of the crowd, who had not rushed onto the field, were yelling, jeering and stamping their feet, clapping their hands like as many madmen. The referee was endeavouring to get the game started, but no one was paying any attention to him. There was another angry scene as the players were going to the dressing room. The local officials met and agreed to toss for the temporary possession of the cup, leaving the question of a replay at Burnley, Parkhead or neutral ground open. Burnley won the toss and were then told that the donor of the cup would not allow it to leave Budapest until one team or the other had won it next year. The players then received their badges, 22 in number. The cup, surrounded on the track by 7 policemen with drawn swords, was left behind. Never had there been such a scene of excitement in the football ground. The spectators, of whom there were 20,000 present, were all shaking with fear and excitement. They had long wished to see a match between a Scottish and an English team in a cup tie, and they saw something which has no parallel in football history. The matter was eventually settled when Celtic defeated Burnley 2-1 in Lancashire on the 1st of September 1914. But the cup had by then been raffled by its owner to raise funds for the Hungarian Red Cross after Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia on the 28th of July, setting in motion a chain of events that led to Britain declaring war on Germany on the 4th of August, and the continent had been plunged into the most destructive war the world had ever seen. In August 1914, most people really did believe the war would be over by Christmas, and there's an air of unreality about the piece on the front page of the Scottish Referee of the 7th of August 1914, in which a correspondent complains about the sheer inconvenience of it all. Just to be out of the way of any stray shrapnel shells that might drop over from the North Sea into the Clyde estuary, I returned from a broken holiday to the centre of activity where war news, more war news, additional war news, official war news, in short, nothing but war news is in the air. From the peaceful seclusion of a quiet holiday haven, I have been hurled into the vortex of newspaperdom, and while I am pretending to be quite agreeable and glad to be in it, I am really very much the reverse. I think it extremely inconsiderate of the German Emperor to barge in on my leisure spell with armies and guns and fleets and things, and for that reason alone, if for no other, I hope he gets a good dusting, confound him. A few days ago, I was calmly contemplating the likeliest pools on a delectable river where trout abound. Now that is all over and done with, and the business is once more wringing my withers. I think that is the correct expression, but if not, it really doesn't matter. The point is that the harness hurts. A few days ago, all was peace. The sound of even distant cannonading was unheard. Bees buzzed, birds chirruped, leaves rustled, water rippled, trout went plop plop in the pools as they came out for flies other than mine, and life was worth living. Now the world is a very different place, and everything has gone cankered. It's absolutely... When the Second World War broke out in September 1939, all football players' contracts were immediately cancelled, although clubs were allowed to retain their registrations, and all official competition was suspended for the duration of hostilities. In August 1914, though, there were no immediate government directives regarding football, and there was a great deal of uncertainty as to how the game should proceed. One thing that did have an immediate effect on many clubs was the call-up of army reservists, but it was tentatively decided that the season could kick off as planned 11 days after the declaration of war on the 15th of August 1914. Jip, in the Scottish Referee of the 10th of August 1914, wrote, "During the past week, owing to the sudden change in the affairs of Europe, the question, should the football season commence on Saturday first or not, has been thrashed almost threadbare. A great many of the folks who are against the opening have lost sight of the fact that the clubs are now amusement caterers, pretty much in the same way as theatrical agents or music hall syndicates, and so far there has been no talk of closing places of amusement. Something is required to keep the minds of the non-combatant class engaged when not employed in the serious business of life, and in order to allay possible panicky feelings. I verily believe there is nothing better than sport, whether cricket or football, to achieve that object. The MCC was asked for a lead last week by some of the leading counties, and the ruling body promptly replied that there was no necessity for the cancelling of matches. The time may come when the football grounds will be required for drilling, but meantime there is little prospect of that, and with the fields clear, the matches should go on, if only to relieve the tension." The situation was a fluid one, and as the war progressed, players' wages were gradually reduced. This was partly due to a significant fall in attendances, and eventually they could be paid a maximum of only £1 a week, and only those who were either enlisted in the forces or engaged in war work were allowed to play football on a Saturday. While the league programme continued as planned, a meeting of the SFA Council on the 22nd of December 1914 voted by a majority of 1 to suspend the Scottish Cup and the playing of international matches for the duration of the war. At this point in the season, Hearts were top of the league, 4 points ahead of Celtic after 20 games, but pressure was building on footballers to set an example and enlist in the forces. Conscription was not introduced in Britain until 1916, and a recruitment drive had been launched in August to encourage single men to volunteer. But after an initial burst of enthusiasm, the flood of volunteers had ebbed somewhat as the realities of modern warfare became apparent. As recruitment efforts were stepped up, it was league leaders Hearts who provided that example called for. The Daily Record reported on the 26th of November 1914, "The Heart of Midlothian players have given a splendid lead to the football community. They have shown their ability on the field of play. They are going to show now that in patriotism also they come second to none. 11 of the players took the plunge yesterday and joined the Active Service Battalion of the Royal Scots, which Sir George Macrae has undertaken to raise in Edinburgh. 6 of the 11 are regular members of the First Division side, the other 5 having been associated with the reserves. Curry, Briggs, Lowe, Watty, Gracie and Wilson go from the first team, and Findlay, Frew, Ness, Ellis and Preston from the reserves. It is hinted that others may follow. Supporters of the club are also expected to fall in behind their favourites in large numbers, so that the Premier Edinburgh club may take credit for having given a lead, which has only to be followed by other clubs throughout the country to remove the stigma that has been cast upon professional football since the war began." The new recruits of 1914 were not thrown straight into the front line, and it would be 1916 before they were sent to the Western Front in great numbers. So those Hearts players would still be available to play for some time after signing up. It's true that their army training took priority over football, but in that sense they were no different from any of the players who had not signed up. They were expected to work long hours at their various occupations and would often not be able to train during the week. Whether a club's players joined the armed forces or not, the club did not have first call on their time. Patsy Gallacher was in the same position as everyone else, and being a time-served carpenter, found a job in John Brown's shipyard in Clydebank, where, like everyone else engaged in war work, he worked 5 days a week, plus Saturday mornings, leaving only Saturday afternoon free for football. Going into the final week of January, Hearts were still 4 points ahead of Celtic as the home straight approached and were in a strong position to take the title. Brigadier reported in the Daily Record of the 25th of January 1915, "With the only two clubs concerned in the dash for the league championship, it is now a matter of sleeves up. The serious business is about to begin. Heart of Midlothian had to leave a point with third Lanark at Cathkin, and now we find them placed relatively with Celtic exactly as they were previous to the sensational defeat of the Parkhead team on New Year's Day at Ibrox. 4 points separate Hearts and Celtic, for while the Hearts have now had 3 draws and a defeat, Celtic's debit account shows 3 draws and 3 reverses. Each has 12 matches to play, the first of these on Saturday first at Parkhead when the pair meet in their return. To both, the result of this game is of vital importance. It might easily have a deciding influence on the championship." Brigadier obviously had a talent for stating the obvious, and the championship would appear to have been decided in Hearts' favour when on the 30th of January 1915 they escaped from Celtic Park with a fortuitous 1-1 draw. All 6 of the Hearts' first-team volunteers played in this match, while the ageing Jimmy Quinn, rapidly approaching retirement, turned out for Celtic on a frozen but rapidly thawing pitch, which, the Daily Record reported, caused the players to slip and flounder, particularly when turning. Hearts took an early lead with their first attack on 5 minutes, and for the rest of the match, Celtic attacked relentlessly, but poor finishing prevented their equalising. Patsy Gallacher almost levelled with a superb individual effort shortly before half-time, described by the Daily Record of the 1st of February 1915. "So in a desperate effort to make the volume of attack produce something, Gallacher ran through by himself and beating Scott, Nellies and Crossan in succession, came suddenly in front of Boyd. The equalising goal was accepted as an accomplished fact when Gallacher, without easing up, quickly and judiciously side-tipped the ball beyond the reach of Boyd. But the Celt had given the leather too much angle and it spun beyond the post as well. Had Gallacher been content simply to smite the ball straight in, all the chances are that he would have scored. I heard some express themselves as if they would have hanged him at the yardarm for his failure in the good old piratical manner. But my reading of the matter was that Gallacher suffered for having used his brains." Andy McAtee equalised for Celtic on 54 minutes, diverting a Johnny Browning corner into the net with his chest. But for all their pressure, they could not find a winner. The draw left Hearts 4 points ahead with 11 matches left to play. Brigadier reported in the Daily Record of the 1st of February, "Hearts may breathe more freely now. They have been to Parkhead, and though they did not conquer, they accomplished what they said they would be satisfied to do. That is, they got a point. So they retain their lead of 4 points over Celtic in the league championship race. Now the Tynecastle team are champions-elect. Even Celtic, their only rivals, are prepared to admit that the Hearts, by every manner of reasoning, ought to win their first championship since 1897, 18 long, weary years ago. The Hearts have struck the trail in real earnest." The Scotsman that same day did not sound nearly so confident, the Edinburgh-based paper reporting, "Both have 11 matches still to play, and the Hearts are 4 points to the good. That is a substantial advantage, but they have a more difficult road to traverse than their rivals before the flag is safely won. Had they been victorious on Saturday, they would have been tolerably secure with a lead of 6 points. But the Hearts had rather less of the game than the Celts, and, everything considered, they did well to draw." Following the showdown at Celtic Park, Celtic did not drop another point until a draw in the final league match of the season. But the strain soon began to tell on Hearts, and after a couple of scares in their next 2 matches, they lost 4-3 at home to Rangers on the 20th of February, in a remarkable match that saw them trailing 4-0 with less than 10 minutes remaining, only to score 3 and come within a whisker of salvaging a point in the last minute. The Daily Record was sure that the army training the Hearts players were undergoing was taking its toll. Brigadier wrote on the 22nd of February 1915, "The strain on the Tynecastle players who are wearing His Majesty's uniform was certain to tell sooner or later. The only wonder is that the Hearts have managed to pull along so successfully up till now. Voluntarily, they undertook the responsibility of training for war while prosecuting the attainment of their heart's desire, which is to win the championship. They may yet succeed, and as a reward for their loyal sacrifices, they probably deserve to, but it almost seems as if they had undertaken too big a task. The connection of the Hearts players with the army is no plaything. They are getting no privileges, and I believe that last week several of them, when they appeared at Tynecastle for some training, were unable to go through any searching exercise. 1 week later, the gap was reduced to a single point when Hearts drew with Hibernian at Easter Road, while Celtic won 2-0 at Firhill. While the Daily Record was in no doubt that the demands of military training was taking its toll on Hearts, the Dundee Evening Telegraph of the 1st of March 1915 reminded its readers that Hearts had collapsed in similar fashion the season before. Do the Hearts lack staying power sufficient to enable them to secure the Scottish League Championship? For the second year in succession, they have collapsed at the most critical period of the season. To finish at the head of the league table, players must have more than playing ability. The strain of winning week in, week out is most trying. This the Hearts have to do in order to keep ahead of the Celtic, who are pressing them hard for Premier place. Hearts have failed to last the pace. At this crucial juncture, Hearts were given a little help by the Army, who allowed their players a couple of days a week off to train with the club. After a 4-1 win over Dumbarton on the 6th of March, Donovan wrote in the Daily Record of the 8th of March 1915, "There may be more than meets the eye in the Hearts' latest success. If I mistake not, we have here the first fruits of the concession made by the military authorities a week or so ago in allowing the soldier players to trip along to Tynecastle for a little practice 2 nights a week. 'Tis wonderful how much tuning up can be done in an hour or two by a master hand like Trainer Duckworth." At the same time as Hearts returned to form, a Patsy Gallacher-inspired Celtic were thrashing Hibernian 5-1 at Celtic Park. Grampian in the Daily Record writing, "2 goals down at the interval, the Easter Road players were rarely in the hunt afterwards. The Celtic's winning margin of 4 goals, not exaggerating one whit their superiority." Hearts dropped another point in a 2-2 draw against Erdrieonians at Broomfield after leading 2-0 on the 13th of March 1915. But with Celtic not playing that day, they moved 2 points ahead, having played a game more. The pivotal moment came on the 3rd of April when Hearts dropped another point in a 0-0 draw against Aberdeen at Pittodrie, while Celtic were beating Erdrieonians 3-0 at Celtic Park. Again, Patsy Gallacher was the inspiration, Waverley writing in the Daily Record of the 5th of April 1915. Forward, I was most impressed by Gallacher and McMenemy. There was method in everything they did. "Easy, Jimmy," shouted the Clydebank wonder as he sent the ball across for Browning to score the second goal. He was evidently afraid McMenemy was going to spoil things. Gallacher is a great little man. By the close of play that day, Hearts were 3 points ahead but had played 2 matches more than Celtic, who now knew victory in their remaining 4 matches would clinch the championship. Only Aberdeen seemed to be a potential stumbling block for Celtic. Brigadier wrote in the Daily Record, "The Hearts have to visit Morton and St Mirren. That the Hearts should fail to beat Aberdeen at Pittodrie is nothing wonderful, especially when regard is had to the absence of Gracie and Wilson. This is the first match in which the Tynecastle team has failed to score, which in itself is an achievement. Nor is it surprising that Aberdeen should be the first to defy their marksmen. Celtic at Pittodrie could get just 1 goal, enough to win by. The Rangers were able also, for only 1 against the Vikings at Ibrox a week ago. 7 of the teams who rank above Aberdeen in the league have lost more goals than they have." It's a shame that nickname for Aberdeen fell out of use somewhere along the way. Celtic's 1-0 win over Aberdeen on the 10th of April 1915 saw them top of the table for the first time that season, and a 4-0 win over Third Lanark at Cathkin Park on the 17th of April saw them clinch the title with 1 game to spare. The 1-1 draw against Motherwell in the final league match was only the 2nd point dropped since the defeat at Ibrox on New Year's Day. Their superiority was confirmed over the next 2 weeks by a 3-2 win over Rangers at Ibrox on the 8th of May 1915 in the Glasgow Merchants Charities Cup final, and on the 15th of May, Celtic defeated a rest of the league team 1-0 at Hampden Park in a match to raise funds for Belgian refugees. By the end of season 1914-15, it was clear that there would be no quick end to the war. The German U-boat campaign to blockade British ports began in February 1915, but the sinking of the Lusitania in May led to a more restricted operation to avoid drawing the USA into the war on Britain's side. In April, the Allied landing at Gallipoli, using Australian and New Zealand troops, opened up a new front in the eastern Mediterranean, bringing the Ottoman Empire into the war, eventually drawing the Middle East into the conflict. And on the 23rd of May, Italy joined the war on Britain's side, declaring war on Austria-Hungary and opening up an Alpine front. What had begun in August 1914 as a European conflict was rapidly becoming global. The worsening situation piled yet more pressure on football. And while not only the Football League but also the FA Cup had run as normal in 1914-15, both were suspended for the duration of hostilities in July 1915. The Scottish League held out, and the new season began on the 21st of August 1915 with a recruitment drive at Celtic Park as they hosted Motherwell on the opening day. The drive was headed by 20-year-old Corporal Frederick Luke, who was awarded the Victoria Cross for saving an artillery gun under heavy enemy fire in August 1914. He had been wounded in May 1915 and was sent to a Glasgow hospital to recover. The Daily Record of the 23rd of August 1915 reported briefly, Corporal Luke, the second VC of the war, was on a recruiting mission at Celtic Park. He did all right. His bag for the Royal Field Artillery contained 32 smart young men. We can only wonder about the fate of those 32 fans who volunteered for action that day. But Corporal Luke was Sergeant Luke by the time the war ended and lived most of the rest of his life in Glasgow, after marrying a Glasgow girl he met while in hospital and enlisted in the Royal Air Force as a ground gunner in 1941. At the time of his death in March 1983, he was the oldest living recipient of the Victoria Cross. His ashes were scattered at Lynn Crematorium. From the outset of the war, Glasgow's Irish Catholic community was broadly supportive of the war effort, content to come to the aid of Catholic Belgium, and by thus proving their loyalty to the United Kingdom, pave the way for Home Rule for Ireland to be granted at the war's end. 46-year-old Willie Maley, the son of a British Army soldier, volunteered himself in August 1914 and was outraged that he was turned down on account of his age. His son was wounded in action, while his brother Tom's son, Corporal Joseph Maley, died from shrapnel wounds on the 17th of May 1915. A heartbroken Tom, by now manager of Bradford Park Avenue, whose strip he had changed to green and white hoops, also volunteered in June 1915, but was turned down on account of his age only because he was recognised by someone working in the recruiting station. Only after the executions following the Easter Rising did Irish Catholic sentiment turn against supporting the war effort. 1915-16 was the season when the realities of war really hit home, and many clubs struggled to find 11 players from week to week. In that opening match against Motherwell, there was a Celtic return for Joe Cassidy, a 19-year-old forward who had been loaned to Ayr United for the previous 2 seasons. He enlisted in the Black Watch in 1915 and would play for Celtic only when on leave. Motherwell fielded a makeshift side, Claymore of the Daily Record of the 23rd of August 1915 reporting, Manager Hunter of Motherwell told me prior to the start that he was in a fix to turn out 11 men, and only sheer urgency made him play Archibald at centre forward because that player was limping badly owing to a damaged knee. Then George Nicholl had intimated his retiral, and McGlade's place at left half was filled by D. Murray, who last figured at centre forward. When I heard the Motherwell handicaps, I expected a day out for the champions, and was agreeably surprised that Motherwell gave such a capital show. Celtic still got off to a winning start, Jimmy McCall, Joe Dodds and Patsy Gallacher scoring the goals in a 3-1 win. They went on to win their first 7 league matches before meeting Rangers in the Glasgow Cup final on the 9th of October 1915. There was no question of a replay being permitted in wartime, and the Daily Record reported on the morning of the final. In the event of a draw at the end of the statutory 90 minutes, an extra half hour will be played, and should the teams then be equal in goals and corners, the destination of the cup will be decided by the spin of the coin. We are asked by the Glasgow Association to state that, although goals only will matter in the result at the end of an hour and a half's play, the corners granted from the very beginning of the match will count, should extra time be requisitioned. There was another reminder, as if it was needed, of the wartime conditions when it was announced in the week before the match that the brothers of both Joe Dodds and Jimmy McMenemy had been killed in action. Despite their bereavements, both played on the Saturday. The crowd was reported as between 60,000 and 80,000, the difference possibly being down to the roughly 20,000 in uniform who were granted free entry. Both teams had 100% records going into the match and a tight encounter was forecast. But Celtic won rather easily, and long before the end the Rangers fans were streaming for the exits, despite the narrowness of Celtic's lead. Rangers almost got off to a flying start, but thereafter were seldom in the match. The Scotsman reported on the 11th of October 1915, "The game had an almost sensational opening as Reid raced off at once and missed, as if by a miracle, what seemed a sure goal. The Celts responded with spirit, and McCall practically repeated Reid's exploit, also to miss the mark. Gallacher did better, holding the ball in seeming hesitancy, only to trick the defence at the right moment and rush through and beat Lock 12 minutes from the start." Rangers equalised in a rare attack 10 minutes later, but Celtic were ahead again before half-time, the Daily Record of the 11th of October reporting, "Craig and Gordon could not hold McMenemy and Browning, and, as McAtee and Gallacher were also difficult to hold, we soon saw what we expected to see. The Rangers' rearguard in another tangle and another goal for Celtic, the scorer being Browning, who gave Lock no chance at all with his angular drive." The second half was a non-event, with the Glasgow Herald lamenting the paucity of Rangers' play. "It was a dreary last half hour to the impartial spectators who retained their places in the hope of witnessing an interesting finish. A period of travail and woe for the following of an 11 which could not put up the semblance of a fight." Once again, Celtic's inside forwards were the architects of their victory. The Glasgow Herald going on, "There was nothing in the Rangers' attack to approach McMenemy and Gallacher when it came to drawing in the defence or piercing it. The Celtic veteran did the manoeuvring, the younger player the thrusting, and all in a manner foreign to Cairns and Cunningham." Any hopes that the Glasgow Cup win would prove the springboard for a title charge were quickly shattered when it was followed by league defeats in successive weeks to St Mirren at Celtic Park and Rangers at Ibrox before the end of the month. Another defeat, 2-0 against Hearts at Tynecastle, followed on the 13th of November 1915 and left Celtic level on points at the top with Rangers, but having played 2 games more. It didn't look promising, but Celtic did not lose another league match until the 21st of April 1917, an incredible run of 62 league matches without loss. The league was won in what must be the most unusual title day in Celtic's history, on the 15th of April 1916, when a 6-0 win over Raith Rovers at Celtic Park meant Rangers could only match Celtic's total, followed later that same afternoon by a visit to Fir Park, where a 3-1 win over Motherwell put it beyond Rangers, who still had 5 games left to play. As well as clinching the league title with their 2 wins in one day, Celtic also broke the record for most goals scored in a single season, previously held by the Falkirk team who finished second to Celtic in 1908. Brigadier wrote in the Daily Record of the 17th of April 1916, "In the competition of season 1907-8, Falkirk, with John Simpson at his greatest and McTavish as his partner, scored 103 goals in the 34 matches that then comprised the championship card. On Saturday, when Celtic played their 34th match of the season and beat Raith Rovers by 6-0, they raised their total to 104. Falkirk's performance was thus excelled by 1 goal. As to the relative merits of the 2 achievements, one must allow for the unusual conditions prevailing throughout the present season. To do so is only to be fair to the Falkirk team of 1907-8 and to suppose they are jealous of their scoring feat. The John Simpson to whom Brigadier referred was more commonly known as Jock Simpson and scored 32 goals in 33 league matches in Falkirk's record season. He was born in Lancashire to Scottish parents who returned to Scotland only months after he was born. Despite this, under the rules of the time, he was not eligible to play for Scotland, and the FA refused to select him for England because he played for a Scottish club. Within weeks of a record £1,800 move to Blackburn Rovers in 1910, he was awarded the first of 8 England caps and won the First Division twice with Rovers before the outbreak of the war. His case had parallels with Patsy Gallacher, who, despite living most of his life in Scotland, was only eligible for Ireland, and despite his incredible talent, was not selected by the Belfast-based Irish Football Association until after the war. The mighty Atom scored a hat-trick that day in Celtic's 6-0 win over Raith Rovers, despite having to go off for treatment after scoring the first. Grampian reported in the Daily Record of the 17th of April 1916, Gallacher had to retire to the touchline for attention by the trainer, but on returning soon made it apparent that his repairs had been thoroughly carried out. He put the finishing touch to a hot Celtic attack and soon afterwards went through by himself and scored a brilliant goal which brought Celtic level with Falkirk's record. The irrepressible Patsy headed into the net again, but just after the referee had whistled for an infringement. Despite the knock, Patsy played against Motherwell later that day, Celtic's only change being Trooper Joe Cassidy coming in at centre forward for Joe O'Kane. Motherwell were also playing their second game of the day and made 3 changes. Clydebridge reported in the Daily Record, Motherwell's game with Celtic commenced amid the slanting rays of the setting sun and concluded under the pale moonlight. I had expected to see flat, stale and unprofitable football from men who had barely had time for a breather after their previous exertions, but in this I was agreeably surprised, for the magnetic presence of the Celtic seemed to put life and mettle in the heels of the Motherwell men, who had only 3 fresh players in their ranks, as the Parkhead men had only 1. The teams crossed straight over at half-time without a break, and Celtic were 3-0 up before Motherwell grabbed a late consolation. Clydebridge concluded in his report, It was an interesting and even exciting game, but there is not the ghost of a doubt that the more methodical and more polished team came out on top. I could say a great deal about the play and players if space permitted, but I content myself with a word about Rundell, the debutant in senior circles. He played a marvellously fine game and was largely responsible for the Celtic score not mounting beyond 3. Despite taking only 1 point from the 4 available against Rangers, Celtic won the league by 11 points over the Ibrox club and followed this with victory in the Glasgow Merchants Charities Cup, beating Rangers 3-0 in the semi-final before lifting the trophy with a 2-0 win over Partick Thistle, Patsy Gallacher scoring a brilliant solo effort, jinking past 3 defenders to fire home. The second season of the war ended with 3 trophies in the Celtic Park boardroom and the team on the park a class above anything else in Scotland. It was all done with a very small pool of players, which the Dundee Evening Telegraph of the 17th of April 1916 picked out as a key reason for their superiority. The success of the 13 times champions is the more remarkable because of the fact that no club carries so few reserves, the management preferring to trust to a limited number of skilled players, blended with admirable judgment, retaining its veterans to develop and coach the occasional junior drafted in and assimilated with unerring facility. This method would prove Celtic's downfall in the 1920s and 30s, but for now it appeared they were untouchable. Events, though, were unfolding in 1916 that would have a shattering effect on the club, if not on their immediate domination of Scottish football. As Celtic were defeating Third Lanark 4-1 with goals from Patsy Gallacher and a Joe O'Kane hat-trick, the Irish Volunteers were taking control of the GPO in Dublin and the week-long Easter Rising was underway. The executions of the rebels over the following month would dramatically change Irish attitudes towards the war, acting as a brake on recruitment in both Ireland and to a lesser extent in the Catholic community in Scotland. Already in January 1916, the government had introduced conscription, making military service compulsory for all single men aged 18 to 41. This did not immediately affect the Celtic squad, most of whom had found work in munitions, mines and shipyards. But the seemingly imminent collapse of the French army at Verdun led to a new conscription act in May 1916, extending conscription to married men, along with a much more stringent approach to what constituted, and what did not constitute, essential war work. Several members of the team would soon be wearing khaki rather than green and white. Celtic's third round win over Alloa had been followed up by league wins over Ayr United away and St Johnstone at home, the latter a narrow 2-1 victory on a mudbath of a pitch, which had man in the know in the Glasgow Observer of the 21st of February 1925, cautioning against overconfidence if those ground conditions were the same that day. If the weather were dry and the turf firm, so that our Celtic artists could find sure footing, there could be little or no dubiety about the result of Saturday's tie. Class is bound to tell. But on a swampy field, partly glue pot and partly mid-ocean, sheer strength is the thing that tells, and in our category of Celtic Samsons, we have only Willie McStay and Vincey McGrogan. I'm praying for good weather and green turf. Solway Star was a club based in Annan who were founded in 1911 and dissolved in 1947. In 1924-25, they played in the short-lived Scottish League 3rd Division that collapsed under heavy financial losses in 1926. They missed out on promotion to the 2nd Division that season only on goal average. Man in the Know wrote of them on the 21st of February. "They are a fine, fiery, fighting band of real footballers, making up in dash and dourness what they may lack in skill and polish. They are bravely battling their way into the 2nd Division against such well-known rivals as Vale of Leven and Queen of the South. Undoubtedly, they are a force to be reckoned with." Man in the Know's prayers for good weather were not answered, and the pitch was once again a mudbath as Celtic lined up Shevlin, W. McStay, Hilly, J. McStay, McGrogan, McFarlane, Connolly, Gallacher, McGrory, Thompson, McLean. In a similar vein to the win over Alloa Athletic in the second round, the visit of Solway Star proved to be a run-of-the-mill encounter, which most of the newspapers reported on in cursory fashion. The Scotsman's report of the 23rd of February 1925 was fairly typical. "The Celtic got through their tie with Solway Star easier than the score of 2-0 would suggest, and it was only in the closing stages, when they lost the services of McGrogan, who was injured, that the visitors did any pressing. There was nothing exciting in the play, which was uninteresting from start to finish." For a detailed description of the match, we again have to turn to Man in the Know, who told the story in the Glasgow Observer of the 28th of February 1925. Solway Star played exactly as expected, the Celtic partisan writing, "As in most lesser league teams, they don't play much football, but they take fairly effective steps to see that the other fellows don't play much either." An authority in the Celtic press box on Saturday said that 7 of the Solway 11 are ex-Third Lanark players. I could believe it. With a touch of Alloa's towsy pugnacity and a suggestion of St Johnstone's defiant roughness, the Star men quite justified their appearance in the third round. But as Willie McCustra remarked to me at the start, class is bound to tell. Mere blind, reckless rushing forward and coarse, countrified stuff in defence may score when pitted against its own kind, but in contest with such dazzlers as Gallacher, McLean, Connolly and McFarlane, well, there can be but one result. The rapier beats the bludgeon every time. Willie McCustra had been a lightning-quick winger for Celtic around the turn of the century and was surprisingly sold to Tom Maley's Manchester City in 1902. He volunteered for the Scots Guards in September 1914 and was in action only a few hundred yards away when Joseph Maley was killed in 1915. He was medically discharged from the army in 1917 after being shot in the knee, and after the war found employment at Celtic as a handyman around the stadium. Celtic attacked fairly relentlessly, but without much success, and man-in-the-nose report suggests Jimmy McGrory still had a way to go before becoming the goal machine of legend, and surprisingly it was his heading that he picked out for criticism. Back swept the Celts towards Muir, and this time the big ex-warrior was given no option with a neat Thompson header taken closer in from a McLean cross. Adam repeated himself within a minute, lifting the ball sweetly onto McGrory's pate. But Jim jumped up and hit it with the crown of his head instead of with his forehead, and the blessed thing bobbed high over the bar. McGrory must remember Joe Cassidy's knack of heading the ball inward and downward. When he masters this item, the Garngadder will rapidly augment his goal record. 'Tis true he scored a fine goal nearing the interval, showing fine judgment and control and coolly taking aim clear of Muir. But he took a deuce of a time over it, and I doubt if such defenders as Dixon, Summers, Rankin or Pat Hunt would give an opponent so much latitude. Since his great day at Cathkin, the Garngadder has somehow seemed increasingly slow and ponderous, and at outside left against St Johnstone he was positively unwieldy. This I attribute to the soapy grounds prevailing in this month of ceaseless rain and sleet. On firmer turf, McGrory, I hope and believe, will give us a steady supply of his Cathkin stuff. Only after Vincent McGrogan was forced off injured did Solway Star manage to even remotely threaten the Celtic goal, and the rearrangement of the team to accommodate his loss demonstrates how differently the game was played before the change in the offside rule that was brought in for the start of the new season in August 1925. His replacement at centre-half was the diminutive Patsy Gallacher. Man in the Know reported, "The wizard towered, metaphorically, in midfield and heroically challenged the plunging advances of the Solway heavyweights, raising many a laugh by his adroit interventions." Solway may have taken an industrial approach to the game, but if a bigger physical presence was required at centre-half, it would have made more sense for right-half Jimmy McStay to be moved across. That it was Gallacher who took over from McGrogan shows that there was no aerial bombardment being launched by the 3rd Division side. They were simply trying to make up in speed and power what they lacked in finesse. Celtic were now into the quarter-finals, but it had escaped no one's notice that they had hardly set the heather alight since the first round win over 3rd Lanark. Man in the Know closed his report with the worries of an unnamed correspondent who obviously thought Celtic could take a leaf out of Solway Star's book. And now for the complaint of a correspondent who wails that, after their Cathkin splutter, the Celtic forwards have settled down to their old vice of playing football instead of getting goals. But isn't it possible to do both? In the not very remote past, a Celtic vanguard, playing as fine football as the world has ever seen, totalled 118 goals in a league season, a feat that has never been approached. My correspondent remarks that the Parkhead forwards play as if the ball were made of glass and must be toyed with, not booted. He broadcasts a clarion call for punch and vigour and biff instead of the present craze for daintily walking the ball into the net. His assertion that, no matter how the next round will be drawn, the Celts will never see the semi-final, I regard as the doleful croak of an embittered pessimist. He clearly thinks that our boys can play no better than they did against Alloa, St Johnstone and Solway Star. But they can. And will. The fourth round would see Celtic paired with St Mirren, and the tie would turn into an epic which needed 2 replays to resolve and ended in the most bizarre fashion possible.